Welcome to Bad Ideas, a show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and the bad idea this week is brought to you by Mandolinsky. Our friend Dan over on Mixer does a great job making alcoholic beverages that I do not consume.
Fourth Room Brewing. He makes amazing beers, including one that'll have my face on it soon.
And the bad idea that we're going to be talking about this week is the South Seas Bubble. Proposed to us by Zachary McClellan. Thank you so much, Zachary, for sending this in as a suggestion. And the South Seas Bubble takes place in England around the 1720 time period. Really, most of the action here is going to happen in 1720. But to understand sort of what drives this, it might help to have a little bit of history from earlier in the centuries. In England at this time, there was one big trading company that everybody had heard of, and you've probably heard of them, Tony, thanks to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
East India Trading Company?
That's correct, the East India Trading Company. And the East India Trading Company was huge at this time. The East India Trading Company had been started as a way for the English government to consolidate debt. They had a lot of debt at this time, and they were looking at a lot of different ways to consolidate it. And over the years, through their profitable trade and also exploitation of several countries in what the English called the East Indies, these guys were raking in the big bucks. It was a good gig to be a shareholder of the East India Trading Company if you could get it. The problem was that there were only 499 stockholders in the East India Trading Company. So those guys are they're getting rich, but it's not really open to everybody else. Now, the way these trading companies worked at the time was that the English government, and probably other governments would do this too, it was localized to a country, but the government would give you a monopoly on trading in a certain geographical area. So if you owned stock in this company, you were allowed to put up voyages and try to get some kind of profit from this area that you own land in. And it's up to you to get that profit, but nobody else can do it. Only these individual companies are allowed to send ships out there. So it was really worth it if you had a place that was worth going to trade in. And they had really good success with the East India Trading Company. They had helped shrink some of their debt, and the East India Trading Company had done really well. And in 1710, the British government finds itself in a position where it needs even more money. It's got a lot of debt. It's prosecuting a war with Spain right now. Wars are expensive, and they had tried this scheme where they were going to fund the war with a lottery. And some of this that I was studying, where the lottery and the finances and the government are all sort of tangled up together, I was not fully able to grasp. There's a lot of financial witchery that's happening here that in the amount of time I had to study it, I was not able to really sink it into my brain. But in essence, what happens is the government owes money to some people, and what they do is they borrow money from other people to pay off the people that they owe, and then they pay a dividend on the amount that they had paid to these people they've borrowed from.
Are you saying that this is almost like a state-sponsored Ponzi scheme?
Not necessarily a Ponzi scheme. Let's be charitable and say this is debt consolidation or refinancing. They're
Okay.
with Bank of America, and they move over to their local credit union because they have a better rate. Again, finances get real hairy, and there's also the fact that throughout this story, the financial sector and the government are basically woven together. They're not always exactly the same people, but they're not always different people. So if you bought stock in the South Seas Company, what you got was 6% annual return on your investment. All right, so whatever amount of debt that you bought, the government would pay you 6% of that debt every year. And you got one of these trading monopolies to the South Seas. Now, the South Seas in this day and age referred to South America. And The problem with the South Sea Company was that England didn't control South America. That was controlled by Spain, who, if you'll recall, we mentioned earlier, England's at war with. So there's not an immediate possibility of them getting some major profits from this South American area like the East India Trading Company was able to get from India and Asia.
So it's like trying to push a monopoly on property you don't own.
Right. It's like saying you, Tony, have the exclusive right to sell Toyotas in your town, but you don't have any Toyotas to sell. So it doesn't do you any good. That's maybe not the best example, but it's what I've come up with right off the top of my head.
Say it's more like not owning the car dealership and trying to.
Yes. So they're doing okay, the South Seas Company, even though they don't have any trade to do. They are getting the 6% payout from the government. They're just kind of basic financial instruments that are potentially linked to this other trading thing, but that's not happening yet. But the people who are in charge of this company see something happening in France and in France's holdings in the New World in Louisiana. There's a man named John Law, and John Law is an economist who has been put in charge of the economy of France and specifically this area of Louisiana, which I guess they called Mississippi. They weren't like divided up necessarily like we would think of it, but it's the area that we would think of today as Louisiana. But this company that he creates is called the Mississippi Company. And the Mississippi Company is similar to the South Seas Company in that they are a company based on the amount of trade that could happen from Mississippi, which France at the time does own.
Yes, pre-Louisiana Purchase.
Yes, we haven't got there yet. But the problem is that Louisiana at the time was not like pumping out a lot of valuable materials, okay? I don't know if you've been to Louisiana, but there's not just gold laying around on top of the ground. So what you have is sort of a colony with a bunch of people being shipped to it and not really much else. And yet John Law, through something that we'll call lying, manages to make people think that Mississippi or Louisiana or whatever you want to call it, they weren't sure at the time, was just busting with all kinds of valuable stuff. And if you wanted to be on the happen in time, you needed to invest in the Mississippi Company. And this is happening almost concurrent with what happens with the South Seas Company. We'll come back to the Mississippi Company in a little bit, but the South Seas Company looks across the channel at France and they see John Law lying or possibly exaggerating the possibilities of what Mississippi or Louisiana might have to offer, and they see his stock going way up. All right, and they know if their stock goes way up, they can sell it for a lot of money. And so they do the exact same thing John Law did. They start spreading rumors that at this time that all this takes place, the war has ended, but the treaty is still being negotiated. And so what they do is they start spreading completely untrue and unsubstantiated rumors that the treaty is going to be very favorable to England in how much trade will be available in the South American region. And they also exaggerate how much wealth is there in South America. This isn't uncommon at the time because it was so far away for most people and so exotic that you could just tell people that there was gold just laying around on the streets, and they didn't know enough to refute that, and it was sort of this exciting new mysterious continent, so maybe it is. You sort of would want to believe something about that. And so those two things combined together all of a sudden make the South Seas Company a very exciting prospect if you're an investor.
It's always a shame to me like how gullible people sound, but this is way after the fact that we're looking at it. Like, I can't imagine that just because it's a faraway place that the cities would literally be lined with gold.
Well, there's also the fact that we have bubbles today
Yep.
that work essentially the same way, where people get excited about the idea of investing in something because it could produce some incredible wealth, but they don't actually look at what they're investing in.
Yeah, it's like whenever people or Time Warner bought AOL and things like that.
The thing is, though, like, you can maybe forgive these people because the South Sea Company has another trick up its sleeve. In addition to outright lying, they take some of their stock and they offer it as what is essentially what you would call a stock option to the highest ranking members of the government, including the king's mistress. And how this worked was these people didn't have to pay for the stock, but they would be able to cash the stock out for the difference of whatever it was worth from when they were offered it to when they cashed out. So the government has a vested interest, or at least a lot of people in the government have a heavily vested interest in seeing the stock go up so that they can make a profit. And then the South Seas Company can turn right around and say to the people, look at all the important, smart, powerful people who own stock in our company, and it's going up. You want to get in on this deal, guys, okay? Because it's going fast. And it was going fast. People were pumped about buying stock in the South Seas Company.
Was this one limited to the number of participants like the other one was?
So the way this one worked, the number of participants in the East India Trading Company, I think they probably could have sold their shares, but it wasn't the same philosophy around it. I think it was mostly like, we own this company and we actually are invested in making this something. Whereas what's starting to happen here is more of a speculation frenzy, where people get excited about buying South Seas Company stock just for the sake of buying stock. I mean, and the South Sea Company continues to spread rumors, and they do a lot of other manipulative stuff to get people buying stock. At one point, it looks like the stock is going to go down, and in order to keep their profits up and be able to sell it in the future, they actually buy the stock to make the price go up so that people will then buy more of it. They do a lot of manipulation like that, and there's things where they give people, like, they sell people stock on loan, essentially. We're like, oh, you can have $100 worth of stock, but it's only $25 today, 25 pounds. So they're rigging a lot of things and not really getting called that much for it. There's one politician, and he's going to come back at the end of the story. I'm going to mention it now. There's a lot of sort of debate about this and what's happening, and the Parliament has to pass several laws in favor of the South Sea Company, and this man, Robert Walpole, essentially predicts everything that's going to happen. He says, this is a bad idea. These guys have got their hooks in the government. It's just going to lead to stock jobbing, which is sort of what they called, sort of reckless speculation. And it's going to end badly for everybody. And he was right. And he ended up being the guy who had to put it together at the end. We'll get to him in a little bit. But everybody is on the English equivalent of Wall Street, buying and selling South Sea stock as fast as they can. And the price is going up and going crazy. The accounts that I read mentioned that you would have, it was so volatile at the time that there would be different prices for the stock between one end of the street and the other. That was how much selling and buying was going on, because obviously you didn't have computers at the time. So you had to, depend on somebody running from one end of the street to the other to tell you what the price was at that point. And it was just crazy. Everybody in London seemed like they wanted to get in on it. And it wasn't just, one of the interesting things was it wasn't just men. Like, there was ladies going around in sort of their carriages or whatever, and, holding out envelopes and like, I would like to buy some stock, please. So they're going crazy for this stock. But you did mention something earlier that is very prescient, that there are only so many shares. All right. Even the South Sea Company, which was created, I think, with a little bit more ability to buy and sell built into it, even this was not enough to sate the appetite of the general public now for buying stocks. And so other companies start popping up. And these companies at the time are called bubble companies.
So they were calling it that, like, before it was even known to be a bubble.
I mean, you say before it was known to be... Somebody must have known, because they're calling them bubble companies. Like, they have the Bubble Company Act at a certain point. This is before everything comes down. Spoilers for the South Seas Company. Like, they are going to get theirs, but they end up enacting the Bubble Company Act to stop this mad speculation, because what starts happening is people create businesses just so they can have something to sell stock in, because people are so pumped up about selling stocks. Now,
see, I thought you were going to be saying, like, oh, it's all these companies that are getting ready to go to South America so they can start exploiting resources, and that's part of the bubble. But no, it's just a place to sell the stocks.
No, because the South Sea Company is the only people who can do the actual stock selling. There's also a practice that happens where they're buying other businesses, like, that have a specific charter, and then not doing what that charter says with them. Again, this gets a little bit into the weeds of stuff that I was not able to fully figure out before I had to come to present to you guys. So it's a complicated issue, but what the upshot is that you would have a company, and it might not be a company with a bad pitch, right? They might be saying, this is a company to make nails. All right, well, people need nails, so that's good. And they're selling shares of stock in their company to make nails. But at this time, nobody was really making any of the stuff that they were saying they were going to make, at least not hardly any of them. It was all just about, if I offer stock at $10 a share and people buy all these shares from me, I've got money and they've got stocks, and they're welcome to. And then those guys would then, like, try to scam somebody else into buying the stock for more so they could make a profit. And it was just like this endless churn of empty paper flying around. And it got so bad that there was a legitimate company that was formed. All right, this is the most egregious example of this, where this guy's not even trying to look legit. But he actually forms this thing and sells this stock in, and I'm quoting the actual title here, a company for carrying on and great undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. So somebody just sets up shop in the middle of their sort of equivalent of Wall Street, sells 2,000 pounds worth of stock in this company that they're just like, there's gonna be some good stuff, I'll tell you about it later. And then that night they're gone. Sailed across the channel with 2,000 pounds, and everybody else has some paper that says the company for carrying on a great undertaking of great advantage. Nobody to know what it is.
That's like one of the weirdest scams that I've ever heard. Like that, how do you give that guy money, especially 2,000 pounds back then?
Well, it wasn't 2,000 pounds for a single stock. It would have been like, people bought several hundred of them.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, for that guy to get so many people scammed into that's insane, especially with that title.
The thing is, and again, we talk about, like, people must have known. There were enough people that did know that somebody went about publishing a deck of cards, a 52 card deck that had for each card a separate company on it, and like a little verse, like a 4-line verse about why they were stupid and why the people who bought stock in them were idiots. There's just like a little woodcut and a little card, and I wonder if any of those still exist, Tony. I would kill to be, okay, I wouldn't kill anybody. I would really enjoy to be able to see one of those cards still today, because the fact that at the same time as everybody's going crazy trying to make money off of this stuff, there are still plenty of people who are like, this isn't gonna happen. You guys are crazy. And the creation of all these companies becomes such a problem that the government has to step in. Like, even the government realizes, okay, all of these extra companies that are being made, that's not cool. We're going to have to put a stop to that. And the ironic thing is, the South Sea Company, they support this legislation. They say, yeah, we got to get rid of all these bubble companies. These guys are selling stock and stuff that ain't worth nothing. And that's just unconscionable. But here's the trick. The South Sea Company has people in Parliament who own their stock. and they're able to, they actually own some of these other companies as well, like these extra bubble companies. They managed to get Parliament steered away from touching their bubble companies and get them to go after just all the other bubble companies. And what happens as a result, because there's not so many other quote-unquote investment opportunities to be had, the stock in the South Sea Company goes up. They managed to engineer their way to an even larger piece of the pie. Now, most of this is happening, as I mentioned, in the year 1720, and specifically in the first half of the year. The price of the stock around the beginning of the year was about £100 per share, and by June into July, it hit its peak at around $1,000 per share. And eventually, because it always has to happen, people realized that they weren't actually investing in anything real. And the bubble started to pop. And it was as bad as any other bubble that you can imagine, and maybe worse because it wasn't really the kind of thing that anybody had seen before. The only other speculative bubble that comes before this in history by any length of time at all was the Tulip Mania bubble, and it was such a different kind of bubble that I think you could maybe at the time have sort of distanced yourself and said, well, that's crazy. We're not buying tulips. What nonsense is that? We have investments in the South Seas. But the share price starts to fall almost as fast as it rose, and this just wrecks the economy. First off, it wrecks a lot of politicians who had stock in this company. Some of them had bought in addition to the stuff that the South Sea Company sort of gave away. They had bought into it. So now we have the aristocracy who had sort of peddled in this speculation. Now these guys are going broke, which is not good. If you have an aristocracy and these people are like supposed to be divinely appointed by gods who be sort of special people, and now they don't have any money, but they still have their mansions and stuff, like that's a real bad look for England. There are also people who have loaned money to investors because they assumed it was just going to keep going up. And so people borrowed to buy stock, and now their stock is worthless and they can't pay back the people who loaned them the money. So a lot of money lenders are just going out of business left and right, and the bubble just tears England up. Even Isaac Newton, right? The Isaac Newton supposedly lost a bundle of money in this bubble. He had invested early on and got out after it went up a little bit, and then saw all his friends really getting rich and thought, well, I gotta get in, and bought in right at the peak and just took it on the chin with this bubble popping. And at the same time, almost literally simultaneously, the Mississippi bubble that we talked about at the beginning, the one started by John Law, it pops also. That bubble crashes down, and France is in basically the same situation where there's runs on the bank, and they, for just a minute, they outlaw the use of gold money because everybody is hoarding gold so much, and they're like, well, you guys can't use gold. And then they realize how dumb that was, and they allow it again, and they get some people killed in a stampede to get gold because it was legal again. It's a wild time. And we mentioned earlier Robert Walpole. He gets the responsibility of putting all this back together. He, as I mentioned, was one of the few people who spoke out like vehemently against this, and his prophecy turned out to be right. He was the Cassandra that nobody wanted to listen to, that couldn't believe. And when it comes back around, he gets put in charge of putting it all back together. And he does, from what I can tell, as decent a job as it was possible to do.
I mean, for a single member of parliament that was able to call it out, like that's pretty impressive that he was able to at least right the ship a little bit.
Well, he uncovers the fraud that was committed by the directors of the South Sea Company, and he realizes that they sold before the stock crashes. Like, he sees that they knew that they were artificially inflating this price, and so he goes and takes their money away. According to the statistic I read, 82% of their wealth was confiscated on average and given to the people who had invested under these false terms. I do want to say also the people who invested weren't completely without blame. Like,
yeah, they bought into something, but they also were driving it up based on rumors and everything else. I am glad to hear that they got some of the money back from these chairmen.
Yeah, he also manages to make sure the king doesn't lose any money, which is a sort of a big deal. The aristocracy takes some of a hit, but he manages not to make it like really just decimate the whole dynasty. Like the king kind of manages to stay in power, and thanks to this guy, sort of the status quo gets a little bit maintained, even while people are really having a hard time. At least he kind of keeps the ship afloat. At least it's still in a bad storm. And in addition to that, he manages to get a lot of the politicians who were heavily supporting the South Seas Company and profiting from that support impeached, those who didn't like die before he was able to get to them.
Yeah. In all honesty, I'm surprised that these people like weren't lynched or something, considering the era.
Well, there is a large sort of class difference. I don't know that you could go up to like, the Lord's Manor, and you need to have a big mob. I mean, there is still an army and stuff, so it's I don't know that it was quite that chaotic, but it was a big deal. And I think the bad idea here should be obvious. A, don't lie to make your stock prices go up, because that's just dishonest. And B, you're not going to get rich quick. Okay? Probably. Don't set out to get rich quick. It's a real bad idea to think that you are going to be the one who beats the odds. If there is an amazing money-making scheme, it's either a lie or it's incredibly risky. And if you go into that not knowing those things, you're going to probably take it on the chin.
Yeah, especially whenever it's like you and everybody else are going to get so rich off of this. Everyone you know is buying it. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. There's some scarcity there. It's just not going to happen.
Incremental growth. Guys, buy some VTIs. That's all I'm saying.
Or just buy gold. That way France can try to keep you from not spending it.
Well, that'll at least hedge you against the ravages of inflation. I don't know that it's going to go up the way you would like for like an investment to go up.
I look at it as an alternative currency, not so much as like, oh, it's going to turn out to be something huge.
Yes, if you're just looking to hang on to what you have, I guess gold is fine. I want to grow, Tony. I want to get rich eventually.
True. I have more silver than I have gold. Yes, right before the bubble breaks on the current economic situation. But that's just speculation.
But that'll do it for this week, folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a like if you're over on the YouTube channel. If you have an idea for Bad Ideas, send it in to badideashow@gmail.com or to our Twitter @HumanEchoes. And if you want to help support us, go over to Patreon, please, and become a patron. We would love it if you could help us support with your money. We give the patrons a shout out at the beginning of almost everything we do.
You also get a lot of cool swag and stuff like that too, so there's more to it than just a shout out.
Yes, you actually get some things and some early access to some of the stuff we make as well. But that'll be it. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.